The crisis in Yemen is escalating. In the wake of a violent crackdown on public demonstrations, the long-term president is now facing a revolt in his own army. Is Yemen, with its past of civil war, now on Libya's violent path? Or is there still time for the largely peaceful Egyptian model of change to be applied? And what will be the role of Yemen's neighbors, or of the wider international alliance now striking at Libyan targets? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to this program. I'm Mike Hanna. The spirit of revolution burnt most bright in Tahrir Square. The right to vote now won and exercised in a referendum that will see elections take place before the end of the year. But even as this democratic process continues, there are what many see as counter-revolutions taking place elsewhere in the region. A massive security clampdown in several countries. And in Yemen, a split among those exercising that clampdown. And given that country's fractious history, the spectre of civil war could become very real indeed. 3 army commanders, including a top general, defected, saying they are now with the protesters calling for the end of Ali Abdullah Saleh's 30-year rule. The move came after thousands took to the streets of Sanaa to mourn the deaths of protesters killed by sniper fire. The most senior to defect is Major General Ali Mohsen al-Ahmar, a long-time confidant of Saleh, along with Brigadiers Ali Mohsen Saleh and Hameed al-Qushaibi. Also in recent days, the most prominent tribal council has thrown in its lot with the protest movement, and a number of newly appointed cabinet ministers have resigned. But will these mass defections be enough to form a peaceful transition of power? Or in a country still recovering from years of civil war, is the divide a spark for another one? Well, joining me now to discuss this issue is Hassan Nafaa, a professor and chairman of the Political Science Department at Cairo University, and Khaled Fahmy, professor and chair of the Department of History at the American University in Cairo, and in Washington, D.C., Mark Perry, a Foreign Affairs Analyst. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with you, Hassan Nafaa. Is there something, do you believe, that can be learned from Egypt in what is happening in a place like Yemen, for example?
Certainly, a lot of things could be learned, as Egypt has learned already from the Tunisian experience. The Tunisian experience was very inspiring, but it has developed its own model. I think Egypt has developed its own model also, and the protesters have been very successful in keeping the peaceful wave of this revolutionary change. But also they gave a lot of sacrifices, and I think everybody knows now that freedom has a price to pay, and you have to persist as much as you can. The army, the Egyptian army, has stepped in at the last moment, despite the fact that the army is very loyal to the president. But I think the army forced the president to step down, and this is inspiring also to other experience. And I think what's going on in Yemen now, in that context, could resemble a little bit what has been going on in Egypt.
Khaled Fahmy, your view of this process?
I think what we're seeing is a very interesting reversal of the trend of history over the past 60, 80, maybe 100 years. Ever since the map of the Middle East as we know it has been drawn, the fate and the destiny of the region has actually been shaped by people outside the region. What we have now been witnessing in Libya, in Egypt, in Yemen, in Saudi Arabia, is a keen desire on the part of the peoples of the region to actually shape their own future, their own destiny. And the regimes and many of their outside backers, including the United States and most seriously Israel, are panicking, because this is something that they haven't witnessed before, and something that is very, very unprecedented.
Mark Perry, to go to you in Washington, D.C., from your position there, do you see this process as well, a regionalization of conflict resolution, as it were, of people within the region to an extent solving their own problems rather than relying on outside forces out the region?
I very much agree with my colleagues that this is unprecedented, and that these are homegrown, democratic, secular, nationalistic revolutions. But I do not sense in the United States any kind of panic. I remember in the midst of the Egyptian revolution walking through the halls of the Pentagon, there was no one there. But you could hear Al Jazeera on every computer and every TV screen as Americans sat back and watched really an awe-inspiring revolution. And while it shows that we can't intervene, we don't have leverage now, this is good news for the United States. There's real politics in these countries, and I think that you'll find that the United States is embracing this.
Just to stay with you, though, Mark Perry, the United States was slow in calling for the ouster of Hosni Mubarak here in Egypt. It was somewhat reluctant, it would appear, to get involved in military action against Libya, and now we have this situation in Yemen. What is the U.S. position at the moment? Is there any consistent position it will adopt in dealing with these emergent revolutions?
I think that you're right. The United States was hesitant. We didn't want to jump on a bandwagon that wasn't going to succeed, frankly. On the other hand, I think the Obama administration has actually been very adept at shaping a policy for the region. We've made it very clear, this administration has made it very clear, we're not going to intervene without international backing. We have a Chapter 7 resolution in the UN. It's very unusual, and unanimity in the international community against Muammar Gaddafi for intervention, but the United States hasn't led it. We're very sensitive about being seen and perceived in the Arab world as once again interfering against the wishes of the Arab people. And frankly, our recent history shows that when we have intervened, we haven't done well, as Iraq and Afghanistan has proven. So we're being very careful, and I actually think that being careful is probably the best policy to follow.
Khaled Fahmy, if indeed the U.S. is stepping back from the kind of direct intervention that Mark Perry mentioned in the past, is this something that can be welcomed, and is this something that can be maintained?
I think it is very much welcomed. I think it is welcomed precisely because people in the region now realize that they are shaping their own future, and that the United States is listening, and it's not taking the lead, and it's taking its cue from the streets. So this is something very significant. And lying beneath it is something I witnessed in Tahrir, and I've been in Tahrir since the 25th of January. It's something that we haven't seen in generations, which is a very deep sense of self-confidence. And this is what I think is unprecedented, is people, once they have this voice, once they realize that the future is theirs, it's in a sense irreversible. The repercussions of this and how this will translate institutionally is something that will take a long time.
Yes, Hassan Nafaa, that is something I'd like you to pick up on. We heard the self-confidence within people. Does that get translated into self-confidence within regional control, within regional relations?
Absolutely, because it is really a self-grown revolution, and there is a real deep conviction that this has to be done by the people without expecting any real support from. Maybe political support is very much welcome, but when a military action is needed, for example, you can find all the people in the area are very much skeptical because they don't trust any military intervention. They don't know what is behind. Nobody wants a repetition of what happened in Iraq, for example. And that's why even those who are fed up with Colonel Gaddafi and who want to remove him, they are not particularly welcoming enthusiastically the military intervention, the European and the American intervention, even if it is under the umbrella of the Security Council.
Yes, Khaled Fahmy, I mean, you were noting that particular point, but there is, to a degree, a lack of consistency here as well. The Arab League supported the no-fly zone, in fact encouraged it, but now opposing very strongly the idea of actually dropping bombs on targets within Libya itself. And at the same time, the Arab League itself is certainly not speaking with one voice in terms of that international intervention in Libya. You have elements of it, Syria, for example, very strongly opposed, as is Mauritania. Is this division a good or a bad thing, the fact that there are differing views on how to deal with regional crises?
Well, in dealing with the Arab League, there are two things. There's the Secretary General of the Arab League, who, in my humble opinion, is actually playing internal Egyptian politics. He's a candidate, or he's a prospective candidate for the presidency here in Egypt. So I think whatever he said yesterday about the bombing of Libya is something that I think is addressing local Egyptian politics. But so there's a difference between that position and the position of the states. Remember that the Arab League is a league of Arab states. It's a league of Arab governments, not a league of Arab peoples. So again, what we are going to see in the coming months is a restructuring, in the coming months and years, is a complete restructuring of the meaning of Arab cooperation as it is reflected in the Arab League itself. Of course, right now, there are different regimes that are terrified of what is happening. Syria is very afraid of what is happening, and they are very much looking over their shoulders to what is happening within their own countries. But the Egyptian army has taken a wonderful stance regarding this and giving the green light for the no-fly zone to be voted upon within the Arab League first, and then to give the green light for it to pass in the Security Council. So again, we're seeing ramifications within the Arab League that is reflective of what is happening on the Arab streets.
Mark Perry in Washington, D.C., do you think that this increased confidence within the Arab region, within the Arab world and the Arab people is something that carries with it a greater responsibility among Arab nations themselves?
When I picked up the front page of the Washington Post this morning, I noticed that the coverage was of a vote in Egypt. And there was an analysis of which party stood where, who went to the polling stations, how many voted, what it meant, what the constitutional amendment said. In other words, real politics. And you can just feel the shake in the policy-making establishment here in Washington that finally the Arab peoples have taken control of their own politics and their own future. And what this means flowing back towards Washington is that to find out what's going on in the region, we're not simply going to be able to pick up a phone and call our chosen dictator. We're going to have to pay attention. And we're going to have to make an assessment based on people's needs and governments that come into office, not into power. This is a significant change that has been wrought by Tahrir Square and by the events in Tunisia and in Libya and Yemen, and it will shake up our foreign policy and it will change our relationship with the Arab world, and I think in a very good way. So yes, these changes in the Arab world have had a deep impact, not just there, but I think internationally, especially here in the United States.
Well, Khaled Fahmy, you heard there the thing that the United States will not be able to pick up a phone and speak to its favorite dictator. It did support Hosni Mubarak for a long period of time. You've got a developing situation in Yemen, for example, a president who has been in power for a long period of time and who has played a very major role in U.S. strategic interest in terms of, as the U.S. sees it, countering terror. What is the role now of the U.S. in this type of position? Or is the onus on the neighbors and on the region to help deal with this crisis in Yemen in particular?
Again, it's a very fluid situation. I think the Yemenis, as Professor Nafaa said, the Egyptians have been inspired by Tunisia. The Yemenis now are being inspired by Egyptians. They are also looking at what is happening in Libya. With the direction to which the Yemen uprising will take will decide many things. Will it go violently? Will it be peaceful, as the Egyptian revolution mostly has been? That's a big question. The main thing for the United States, I think, is not to interfere and to heed the voice of the people on the streets in Yemen, and to look very closely at its long-term policy of stability, privileging stability at the expense of real democracy, because this is what happened in Yemen for many, many years. The Yemeni president, like the Egyptian president, like Gaddafi now, has been saying, I'm fighting al-Qaeda. You have to back me up in order to deal with your own enemy. Now we have realized that this is something that his people did not buy. So we have to wait to see which direction the Yemenis want their revolution to go, which kind of model it will follow, and then basically the United States will have to follow that.
Hassan Nafaa, that question there of it's Yemenis determining what they are going to do and how the process is going to go forward. But that issue, though, of its neighbors, for example, Saudi Arabia sitting watching what's happening across its borders. Are developments in Yemen a threat to Saudi Arabia, for example?
Well, I think it will affect very much what the Gulf states, but the situation in Yemen is very different. They are tribals, but the political situation is completely different. So I don't think it will go the same way as it went in Egypt, Tunisia, and Yemen. These three countries are a little bit more similar than what's going on in the Gulf. It will be more easily to contain. But I have to differentiate regarding the American position between two phases, the phase of trying to topple the regime and what will be the American and the Western position, because by just saying you don't have to shoot to the protesters, for example, this could help very much. But if it is needed, like in the case of Libya, to intervene militarily, then the situation became a little bit complicated. I am not quite sure how it will goes, because we can see premises of, I'm not going to say revolt in Saudi Arabia, but there is some real unrest. Saudi Arabia is crucial for the U.S. interest. I don't know how the Americans will, how they will react, but I can see the wind of change sifting in Saudi Arabia, and then we will see exactly the real position of the United States. It might be completely different of what we have seen until now in the other areas.
Mark Perry in Washington, I just want to bring up this issue that has been quoted and discussed at length here in the region, the issue of what some see as double standards. For example, quoted very widely is the fact that the U.S. Secretary of State criticized the United Arab Emirates for being part of a Gulf force mounting operations curbing public dissent in Bahrain, at the same time as asking the UAE to be part of an international mission carrying out military actions in Libya. Many see this as a double standard, in effect, in terms of protecting one authority, that of Bahrain, and yet encouraging action against a country like Libya. Is there an awareness of the potential to double standards as the US finds its way in this new world?
The direct answer to your question is yes, there is an awareness of a double standard. There's also an awareness that the one way to get around the double standard is to just not talk about it. And we've seen this from the Secretary of State, we've seen it from the Secretary of Defense, and even from the President of the United States. The President has made it very clear, however, the policy of the United States is to support nonviolent political change and to be on the side of the people in Tahrir Square, which he has been. But I think that my colleagues there in Cairo are right. This is very uncomfortable for the United States. There's no question. What are we going to do in Saudi Arabia? In a sense, Mr. Obama has set a precedent for what we do. We're not going to intervene in Saudi Arabia unless there's a UN resolution, as there was on Libya. What's the likelihood of that? It's not very good. So President Obama can say, sorry, we don't have a coalition, we don't have a UN resolution, we're for democracy, but we're not going to intervene here because we don't have the coalition. But in Libya, we did. And this is kind of a very sophisticated, nuanced way of getting out and getting around the question that you talk about and the apparent and inherent contradiction in American policy.
Well, Khaled Fahmy, though, the whole situation, the whole regional areas of power and of concerns are truly in flux at the moment. That's very clear from our discussion. But I just want to get back to that point about Yemen and, in a way, Saudi Arabia, the existence of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Now, Muammar Gaddafi has used this as a cause of what is happening in his country. But in Yemen, and certainly there's deep concern in Saudi about the activities of Al-Qaeda. Are there different things happening? Is there a possibility that one is giving it as an excuse and the others are seeing real problems that could emerge from popular revolution?
No, I mean, there is a connection. I mean, there is a presence of Al-Qaeda. There is a connection between the current situations and the rise of terrorism. The problem is that the causal relationship has been missed. The reason why we have terrorism, the reason why we have Al-Qaeda in the first place is because of lack of democracy, because of lack of prospects of peaceful expression of opinion and political expression. And we have been saying this for years and years and years, that the longer the process of political opening is postponed, the more acute the crisis becomes. And the answer should never have been a security-informed answer, the way the Bush administration and many of the Arab regimes have been addressing the problem of Al-Qaeda and various other groups. So now we have a very serious problem. Do we continue doing business as usual, addressing Al-Qaeda and other extremist organizations in a security manner, or do we take the risk of dealing with it as a political issue that addresses mostly the youth of these societies?
Let's go to Mark Perry in Washington on that particular point. What's your answer to that question just posed?
Support for democracy makes the region more secure, not less secure. Support for democracy is in America's interests, and it's the biggest weapon and the best weapon we have against extremism and Al-Qaeda. I'm a lot less worried about Al-Qaeda than many of my fellow citizens. And I agree absolutely. The one thing that made Al-Qaeda possible were these dictatorships. And if we can help to build, and if the people of the region can build strong democracies and robust democracies, Al-Qaeda doesn't have a chance of winning. So I very much agree with the previous speaker.
Hassan Nafaa, your view on what is being discussed at the moment, that ultimately the process of democracy is in itself the strongest protection against those who would encourage instability?
I think we can certainly effectively deal with terrorism if you have the whole people, if you have a real democratic regime, because the whole people will be determined to fight terrorism much more effectively than depending on a despotic regime to do the job. So, but the question whether we can, in the Arab world, we can see that the revolutionary wave successfully getting rid of the despots, but whether the Arab people will be as successful to establish a real working democratic regime, this is something that has to be seen. I think this will take a long time, and I'm not quite sure that it will be easy. We are facing a lot of problems in Egypt. Tunisia is in a less difficult situation, but it will take some time.
And a lot at stake in the region under flux. Thank you so much to our guests for joining us here in Cairo, Hassan Nafaa and Khaled Fahmy, and in Washington, Mark Perry. And thank you for joining us. We always welcome your views and suggestions. You can email us here at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Mike Hanna. Thank you for joining us.